inspiring. What about the other thing you talk about? You've mentioned about sensory perception as a thing that like is just you have to infer about the sources of the thing that you have perceived through your senses. So let me ask another ridiculous question: Is anything real at all? Like, how do we know it's real? How do we make sense of the fact that, just like you said, there's this brain sitting alone in the darkness trying to perceive the world? How do we know that the world is out there
I
to be perceived?
Yeah, so I don't think that you should be asking questions like that without
Yeah.
passing a joint.
Right. No, for sure.
Yeah,
I
but
actually did
here,
before this, so I apologize. Yeah.
okay, no, well, that's okay. You apologize for not sharing. That's
Yeah.
okay. So, I mean, here's what I would say. What I would say is that the reason why we can be pretty sure that there's a there is that the structure of the information in the world, what we call statistical regularities in sights and sounds and so on, and the structure of the information that comes from your body, it's not random stuff. There's a structure to it. There's a spatial structure and a temporal structure. And that spatial and temporal structure wires your brain. So an infant brain is not a miniature adult brain. It's a brain that is waiting for wiring instructions from the world. And it must receive those wiring instructions to develop in a typical way. So, for example, when a baby is born, the baby can't see very well because the visual system in that baby's brain is not complete. The retina of your eye, which actually is part of your brain, has to be stimulated with photons of light. If it's not, the baby won't develop normally to be able to see in a neurotypical way. Same thing is true for hearing. The same thing is true really for all your senses. So the point is that that the physical world, the sense data from the physical world, wires your brain so that you have an internal model of that world so that your brain can predict well to keep you alive and well and allow you to thrive.
That's fascinating that the brain is waiting for a very specific kind of set of instructions from the world. Like not the specific, but a very specific kind of instructions.
Yeah. So scientists call it expectable input. The
Right.
brain needs some input in order to develop normally. And so we are genetically, we, as I say in the book, we have the kind of nature that requires nurture. We can't develop normally without sensory input from the world and from the body. And what's really interesting about humans and some other animals too, but really seriously in humans, is the input that we need is not just physical, it's also social. In order for an infant, a human infant to develop normally, that infant needs eye contact, touch. It needs certain types of smells. It needs to be cuddled. It needs, right? So without social input, the brain, that infant's brain will not wire itself in a neurotypical way. And again, I would say there are lots of cultural patterns of caring for an infant. It's not like the infant has to be cared for in one way. Mm-hmm. Whatever the social environment is for an infant, that it will be reflected in that infant's internal model. So we have lots of different cultures, lots of different ways of rearing children, and that's an advantage for our species, although we don't always experience it that way. That is an advantage for our species. But if you just feed and water a baby without all the extra social doodads, what you get is a profoundly impaired human.
Yeah, but nevertheless, you're kind of saying that the physical reality has a consistent thing throughout that keeps feeding these set of sensory information that our brains are constructed for. But
yeah, the cool thing though is that if you change the consistency, if you change the statistical regularities, so prediction error, your brain can learn it. It's expensive for your brain to learn it, and it takes a while for the brain to get really automated with it. But you had a wonderful conversation with David Eagleman, who just published a book about this, and gave lots and lots of really very, very cool examples, some of which I actually discussed in How Emotions Were Made, but not obviously to the extent that he did in his book, it's a fascinating book. And it speaks to the point that your internal model is always under construction. And therefore, you always can modify your experience.
I wonder what the limits are. Like if we put it on Mars, or if we put it in virtual reality, or if we sit at home during a pandemic and we spend most of our day on Twitter and TikTok. Like, I wonder where the breaking point is, like the limitations of the brain's capacity to properly continue wiring itself.
Well, I think what I would say is that there are different ways to specify your question, right? Like, one way to specify it would be the way that David phrases it, which is, can we create a new sense? Like, can we create a new sensory modality? How hard would that be? What are the limits in doing that? But another way to say it is, what happens to a brain when you remove some of those statistical regularities, right? Like, what happens to an adult brain when you remove some of the statistical patterns that were there and they're not there anymore?
Are you talking about in the environment or in the actual, like, you remove eyesight, for example? Or
Well, either way. I mean, basically, one way to limit the inputs to your brain are to stay home and protect yourself.
I see, yeah.
Another way is to put someone in solitary confinement. Another way is to stick them in a nursing home. Well, not all nursing homes, but, but there are some, right, which really are where people are somewhat impoverished in the interactions and the variety of sensory stimulation that they get. Another way is that you lose a sense, right? But the point is, I think that, the human brain really likes variety, to say it in a, like a sort of Cartesian way. Variety is a good thing for a brain. And there are risks that you take when you restrict what you expose yourself to.
Yeah. There's all this talk of diversity. The brain loves it to the fullest definition and degree of diversity.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the only thing, basically, human brains thrive on diversity. The only place where we seem to have difficulty with diversity is with each other.
Yeah.
Right. But who wants to eat the same food every day? You never would. Who wants to wear the same clothes every day? I mean, my husband, if you ask him to close his eyes, he won't be able to tell you what he's wearing.
Yeah.
He just, right. He'll buy 7 shirts of exactly the same style in different colors, but they are in different colors, right? It's not like he's wearing.
How would you then explain my brain, which is terrified of choice, and therefore I wear the same thing every time?
Well, you must be getting your diversity.
Elsewhere.
Well, first of all, you are a fairly sharp dresser, so there is that. But so you're getting some reinforcement for dressing the way that you do. But no, your brain must get diversity in
other places.
In other places. But I think so the 2 most expensive things your brain can do, metabolically speaking, is move your body and learn something new. So novelty, that is diversity, right, comes at a cost, a metabolic cost, but it's a cost. It's an investment that gives returns. And in general, people vary in how much they like novelty, unexpected things. Some people really like it. Some people really don't like it. And there's everybody in between. But in general, we don't eat the same thing every day. We don't usually do exactly the same thing in exactly the same order, in exactly the same place every day. The only place we have difficulty with diversity is in each other. And then we have considerable problems there, I would say, as a species.
Let me ask, I don't know if you're familiar with Donald Hoffman's work about this questions of reality. What are your thoughts of the possibility that the very thing we've been talking about, of the brain wiring itself from birth to a particular set of inputs, is just a little slice of reality? That there is something much bigger out there that we humans, with our cognitive capabilities, is just not even perceiving. That the thing we're perceiving is just a crappy, like Windows 95 interface onto a much bigger, richer set of complex physics that we're not even in touch with.
Well, without getting too metaphysical about it, I think we know for sure. It doesn't have to be the, crappy version of anything, but we definitely have a limited we have a set of senses that are limited in very physical ways, and we're clearly not perceiving everything there is to perceive. That's clear. I mean, it's not that hard. We can't without special. Why do we invent scientific tools? It's so that we can overcome our senses and experience things that we couldn't otherwise,
Right.
whether they are, different parts of the visual spectrum, the light spectrum, or things that are too microscopically small for us to see or too far away for us to see. So clearly, we're only getting a slice. And that slice, the interesting or potentially sad thing about humans is that whatever we experience, we think there's a natural reason for experiencing it. And we think it's obvious and natural and that it must be this way, and that all the other stuff isn't important. And that's clearly not true. Many of the things that we think of as natural are anything but. They're certainly real, but we've created them. They certainly have very real impacts, but we've created those impacts. And we also know that there are many things outside of our awareness that have tremendous influence on what we experience and what we do. So there's no question that that's true. I mean, just but the extent is how fantastic.
Yeah,
Really, the
exactly.
question is how fantastical is it?
Yeah, like